Okay, so recently I've been thinking about how I was raised with internationalism, even though I was born in 1987 at the brink of the collapse of the Soviet Union. I still was able to witness a lot of that internationalism, and I am so grateful for it, because nowadays I can see how dangerous it is when people do not get exposed to different cultures at an early age. I see how people are so afraid of the other, of the person who look different from them, who act a little bit different, who may speak a little bit differently. I see that a lot of this xenophobia comes from this deep-rooted fear of the other coming in and taking your job, of the other coming in and taking your women. And all of these silly fears, fascism has been really exploiting for over 100 years now. And fascism is here to protect the capital. If you haven't read this book yet, I highly recommend you do. I think it's a very simple read. It's a very accessible read, but it still examines the aspects of fascism that are necessary for all of us to still remember, because fascism is on the rise. Once again, we need to look out for it. We need to know how to deal with the people who may succumb to this. We need to start seeing people who may start having very radical thoughts about the other. We have to see them as people still, but we have to understand the root of the problem. And the root of the problem of fascism, just as I keep saying time and time again, is fear. Fear is cured with knowledge and understanding. And in order to foster an environment where you can spread knowledge and explain things so that people truly understand them, and also show people that you are trustworthy despite being different, that you can be relied on, that you can be not only helpful to these people, but so can they, and together you can build a community despite all these differences. And this is a message that I was growing up with in the early 90s, even though it was a terrible time to be alive, and I shared many times here on my channel of the horrors of growing up in the post-Soviet nightmare. And still, it persisted, this deeply rooted desire of my ancestors of uniting together with others and standing up to all the evils of the world, of the evils of capitalism, the evils of imperialism. This was still alive and well, and it helped me so much growing up, because to me, when I was growing up, nationalism was so bizarre. It was so savage to me to think that people still look at each other from the standpoint of nationality or ethnicity. And I was really one of the people who did not see color, just simply because I grew up in a very internationalist environment, and I knew people from all over the Soviet Union. I knew people who were Kyrgyz, Tatar, Kazakh, Russian, Ukrainian, Uyghur, and Tajik, and Uzbek, and Dungan, and all the people from all over Central Asia. And all these people still practiced a lot of their traditional culture. They still prepared their traditional foods. They spoke their language. So I was exposed to all of this just, going to school, just looking at people. And of course, it wasn't perfect. Just as I said before, it was the 90s. It was a ruthless time. It was a terrible time. People were forming gangs to survive. People were scamming each other, again, just to survive. Young people, obviously children, were exposed to all of this, so they would be afraid. And I started to witness that xenophobia rising as I grew a little bit older. People started making fun of others for, the way they looked and the way they spoke, and their parents and where they came from. They would sometimes tease each other based off of nationality, but it only started in my later teens, and it was still very much frowned upon. A lot of us, we were like, ew, why would you look at someone's ethnicity or background or parents or appearance and make fun of them? This is so lame. So it was not very cool to be racist or to be nationalistic growing up here, and it is getting so much worse now. Nowadays, we have things coming from all over, from Russia, from the United States, from Europe. All of this xenophobia is infecting us as some kind of disease. And again, I'm not saying that here we were living in this perfect internationalist utopia. Of course, we were not, because the Soviet Union didn't collapse just overnight. This process of degradation happened over time gradually. It's been happening ever since. Some people argue the 50s, some people say the 60s, some of the 70s, but definitely in the 80s, it was coming to the culmination, the climax, which ultimately led to the collapse. And it, of course, was one of the reasons. There were economic reasons, there were other reasons, there were many reasons. Just as I keep saying, it's a very complex issue. But even in the aftermath, for a while, it was still not as bad. And it kept getting worse and worse by the end of the 90s, where the economic crisis was not as rampant here in these lands. Things picked up for a little while. And then in 2008 or so, it started crumbling down again. And now we have a very similar situation as the rest of the world, as many of the countries that are called the third world, even though we're not at all the third world. We used to be a part of the Soviet bloc, the socialist bloc, and this was the first or the second world, depending on your desire, I guess. And then the other bloc was the capitalist bloc, and the third bloc was everyone else. So we were never a part of the third world countries, and we are often still referred to as a developing country, which I also have a problem with, because are we actually developing? So some time ago, I was exposed to the term majority world, and I do prefer this because it kind of shows a stark contrast between the United States, some places in Europe, and the majority world. So the majority world, I think, is a great phrase to describe a lot of the places that are not the US and not some places in Western Europe. And just as I said before, and as I will continuously repeat until the day I die, it is all because of capitalism and its highest stage, imperialism. It is not because people have grown more stupid and more ignorant just out of the blue. They did not become such out of the blue. They became such because of the conditions. When you're poor, when you don't have any resources to live a normal life, when you can't go to the hospital to take care of your basic human needs, when you are afraid of not having enough food, when you're afraid your children may die, when you are so scared of all of these legitimate things happening to you, you are going to start looking for solutions. And the solutions that the empire provides for us are always pointing at little marginalized groups and saying it is them, it is the immigrants, it is these marginalized LGBTQ plus folks, it is those foreigners, it is those foreigners from this and that country, and it is always that enemy that is coming from the outside. It is the enemy that is always weak and strong simultaneously. And this is one of the tenets of fascism that has been studied again and again. But I just want to remind you all that it was not like this just 30 years ago, just 30, 40 years ago, even when we had a withering Soviet bloc, it was not that bad. It's getting progressively worse because we do not have a strong socialist bloc anymore. We do have some places that are still practicing socialism, like China with socialism with Chinese characteristics, Vietnam, Cuba, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and some other places. But we don't have enough of a bloc that is ultimately striving to build socialism and communism. And this is why the US empire has become so absolutely savage at destroying the world, at accumulating as much as possible. And the alternative is absolutely needed. And all the people in all the places of the world, they're starting to realize that need. They feel that no matter how few immigrants are around, no matter how few marginalized folks are visible, no matter how many minorities they kill, life is not getting better for them. And if you look at the statistical data, if you look at all of the comparisons between the USSR and the US, economic comparisons, social comparisons, you will see that in the USSR, every single number was going up until the late 60s or so. In the United States, however, that was not the case. That was not the trend. And also the USSR largely affected the US and the Western world generally because the Western world had to pick itself up a little, perk the workers up a little, because otherwise they were afraid that the socialist influence, the communist influence, the scary red monster was going to infect the workers of their lands, which was happening. There were groups of workers who continuously were looking up to the USSR, who continuously worked towards the liberation of the entire world in the Western countries. But unfortunately, they were not successful, just as we were not successful with our very first socialist project here in these lands. But this fight is not over, because this is the fight for not only the liberation of the entire humankind, it is also the fight for the survival of the planet itself. So I encourage everyone to learn as much as possible about the history of the socialist projects, to get to learn the actual history of your own country if you come from a Western world. Get together with like-minded people, read together, discuss, look at the sources together, talk about your grievances, meditate, experience the world together, start mutual aid projects, start all kinds of organizational projects that unite you and that help you gather resources resources so that you're prepared for what's to come. We are not going to be able to escape the upcoming changes. They're going to be big, but many of them will be gradual. It's not like there's going to be some overnight disaster that's going to wipe out the vast majority of the population. I don't believe that's going to happen. However, we are facing some scary times, some scary changes. So please be careful, be mindful, read your theory, do as much as you can, take care of yourselves. Consider supporting me on Patreon. Do take care of yourself and your community first. I hope you have a great day today, and I'll talk to you sometime later.